So what are the drawbacks? Because they're real. The ESOP drawbacks, it's not cheap to set up one of these transactions. As you can imagine, that earlier slide with all the different parties and the arrows all over the place, we have multiple professionals involved. There is a buyer team, usually a professional trustee with his own separate legal counsel and his own financial advisor. There's a sell side team, a consultant like me, separate legal counsel, maybe a financial advisor of their own, so that we can bounce offers back and forth against each other. So all of those professionals require fees. As a rule of thumb, I tell people 2 to 3% of the fair market value. Just figure that that's what it's going to cost all in. The larger the transaction, that percentage goes down. And you might realize that that's not different than typical business broker fees or investment banking fees, with the big caveat that I would say that those fees don't come out of the seller's pocket in an ESOP deal, whereas they do investment banking fees and brokerage fees come out of the proceeds of the seller. These are corporate expenses. Okay. You can't use an ESOP to benefit just a select group of employees. I come across this a lot. I sit through a whole presentation with a business owner. He says, this is great because I was always looking for a way to turn the company over to my 3 key guys. This will not do that. It has to be a broad-based, it's a qualified retirement plan. It has to be broad-based. You can't discriminate in favor of highly compensated employees. If you need to enhance the benefit to that key group of executives, there are other things that we can layer in on top of the ESOP. Non-qualified deferred compensation that's equity-based is typical. Stock appreciation rights, phantom stock, those sorts of benefits can be added on top of the ESOP benefit. And those non-qualified benefits can discriminate in favor of the key people that are going to make this work. ESOP can only pay fair market value. What's wrong with that? Only fair market value. Well, we all hear about companies that get bought and sold for multiples that are astronomical. There's a strategic buyer out there who really doesn't care that the company's never made any money, and they're still going to pay billions of dollars for them because there's a strategic interest there. The ESOP can never do that. So if you're in an industry, if you have a business where someone's going to pay you EBITDA multiple of 20x, ESOP's not for you. Okay. Typical ESOP candidate has to be of a certain minimum size, or else the transaction fees just really don't make sense, and the ongoing administrative costs don't make sense. Again, it's difficult to say what a rule of thumb is, but I typically say 40 employees, $1 million of earnings. Below that we could talk, but probably not an ideal candidate. Other issues to be aware of: that ESOP company is eventually going to have to repurchase all of that stock that it's allocating to the participants over that 20 to 35 year period. So that creates a significant liability or repurchase obligation we use in the industry. And I've got dozens of very mature ESOP clients that have been ESOPs for more than 15 years. I have yet to see a single case among my clientele where they're paying more in annual repurchases than they would have been paying in corporate taxes. So I consider that still a net positive. All that money is going to the employees, which is what you want, not going to the government. There's accounting issues. Leveraged ESOPs have very interesting GAAP accounting rules to deal with. I say interesting, kind of tongue-in-cheek. So it's not for the faint of heart among the CPA world, but it's doable. And it really does a number on the debt-to-equity ratio of the balance sheet. Okay, banks can be talked through this; they can understand it. Especially experienced ESOP lenders, they get it. And then there is increased both complexity and then risk of scrutiny by the DOL and the IRS. There's huge tax benefits being given away here, so the government has a very keen interest in making sure that they're not abused. Let's talk about that 1042 election just a little bit more. So I'm going to roll over my gain into this replacement portfolio, qualified replacement property. What are the rules? Okay, so you've got to be a C corporation at the time of the transaction in order to qualify. If you're currently an S corp, you have to revoke the S election in order to do the 1042 deal. If you're an LLC, not a problem. You incorporate the LLC As a C corporation, they make an S election beginning of the next fiscal year. So that's an easy one. The owner has to own the stock for at least 3 years before he sells it. Usually that's not a problem, right? Most of our business owner clients own it for many, many years. You have to acquire the replacement property no later than 12 months after the ESOP transaction date. You can interestingly acquire it 3 months before the transaction. I don't quite know how you do that, but you have that 15-month window. What qualifies as qualified replacement property? Only stocks and bonds of domestic operating corporations. So this law came into effect before mutual funds were popular. Exchange traded funds didn't exist. Okay, so none of that was really contemplated when this legislation was written. So those are out because they are not operating companies; they're holding companies, right? They're investment companies. No REITs, because again, that's passive, not active. The company does not need to be publicly traded. That's an important point. Every once in a while, we come across a seller who says, "I want to take 10% of my proceeds and I want to capitalize a new business venture. Can I do that?" Absolutely, that qualifies. Okay. And then there's this great market for financing these QRP purchases, which is with as little as 10% down using ESOP floating rate notes. We can talk a lot more about that industry if you're interested. It would be a whole nother discussion.